story called Stone Soup, and it's a folk tale, which was written a long time ago. And people just tell it, and they tell it. Exactly. It is, this exactly was written in 1968, which is older than your parents. And it was written by Ann McGovern. So, there was this young man who went out walking, and he was on a journey, and he was walking and walking and walking. He got really hungry. You know how it is when you're out walking, when you get hungry? And so he saw a house off in the distance, and he said, "That looks like a fine house. I bet they have some food." So he went up to the door, and he knocked on the door, and this little lady came to the door, and she opened it, and she said, "What do you want?" And he said, "I just want some food." And she said, "We don't have any food. We have no food in the house and no food in the garden for you." And she started to close the door. And the young man said, "Well, if you don't have any food for me, how about if you give me a stone?" "A stone? What do you need with a stone?" she said. He said, "Well, if you could give me a stone, I could make some soup." And the lady said, "Stone? Soup from a stone? Fancy that. I've never heard of that. But if you want a stone, there's one out on the road." So the young man went out to the road and he found a stone. He found a nice round gray stone, and he picked it up, and he went back to the lady, and he said, "Now, if you bring me a pot, I can make you some soup." She said, "Soup from a stone? Fancy that." So he gave her the stone, and he put it in a pot. She brought some water, put the water in the pot, put it on the fire, like your fireplace, put it on the fire, and so there's a stone and pot and water, and it starts bubbling. And she said, "It's just water." And he said, "Well, it'll be better if we have some onions." And she said, "Onions?" She went to the garden and she got some onions and brought it back and put it in the pot. "Soup from a stone? Fancy that," she says. And she smells it, and she looks, and she goes, "It's bubbling fast. It's cooking fast, the soup with a stone." And he said, "It'll be better if we had carrots." So she goes to the garden, and she gets some carrots. And so she puts the carrots in the pot with the yellow onion and the gray stone, and it bubbles, and it bubbles, and she says, "Soup from a stone? Fancy that." And it bubbles and bubbles, and she says, "It tastes good." And he said, "You know it will taste better if we have some juicy beef bones." So she goes and gets some juicy beef bones. She puts the bones in the pot with the long skinny carrots and the yellow onion and the round gray stone. And it bubbles and it bubbles, and she goes, "Soup from a stone? Fancy that." And she tastes it, and she says, This is fit for a prince." And he says, "Well, it would be fit for a king if you put a little bit of pepper and a handful of salt." So she went and got some pepper and some salt, put it in the pot with the juicy beef bones and the long thin carrots and the round yellow onion and the round gray stone. And it bubbles and it bubbles, and she says, "Soup from a stone? Fancy that." And he says, she says, "It's too thin." And the young man says, "Well, it would be thicker if you put some butter and some barley." And so she went and got some butter and barley, put it in the pot with a little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper and a handful of salt, with the juicy beef bones and the long skinny carrots and the round yellow onion and the round gray stone, and it bubbles and it bubbles, and she says, "This is soup fit for a king. Soup from a stone? Fancy that." She says, it's fit for a king, and I'm going to set the table like for a king. So she gets a nice tablecloth, and she sets it out in a nice china, all of her good dishes, and sets it out, and they start eating. And she says, soup from a stone, fancy that. This is good soup. And they eat it all up. And they're all done, and they get to the bottom, and they look down, and the stone is there. And the young man says, well, I'll be on my way. Thank you for the soup. And he picks up the stone, and he puts it in his pocket, and she says, why are you taking the stone? And he said, well, the stone's not done yet. I need to cook it some more tomorrow. And so he heads off down the road, and he walks, and he walks, and he reaches in his pocket, and he gets that stone, and he goes, soup with a stone, fancy that. The end. You can speak.